Live from Singapore, this is Insight with Haslinda Amin, where we dive deeper into the stories that matter with crucial context and sharp analysis.
In
the meantime, we should jointly oppose overstretching the national security concept in the field of AI, or placing one country's security over that of others.
President Xi Jinping takes center stage at China's flagship AI event. As its homegrown models gain global traction, Beijing is pushing to shape AI rules, while security concerns grow on both sides. Asia's tech sell-off is gathering pace. Taiwan and Japan's benchmarks are being dragged as chip stocks slide, and losses are spreading into European and U.S. futures.
The cover-up of this colossal security breach is even more disturbing in light of the additional information showing that China engaged in other election-related activities to undermine my first administration and our 2020 campaign. They did not want, and they just didn't want it. They fought like hell not to have it, Donald Trump, to win.
A fresh geopolitical shock hit sentiment with President Trump unveiling declassified intelligence alleging Chinese interference in the 2020 U.S. elections. Samir Puri of King's College London joins us to discuss the latest shocks and the continuing U.S.-Iran conflict. And India's monsoon deficit remains a key economic risk. We speak with former Agriculture Secretary Siraj Hussain on delayed sowing, food prices, crop risks, and what comes next. Our top story today, Chinese President Xi Jinping has made his first appearance at the World AI Conference in Shanghai, where he urged international cooperation on AI governance. It signals the growing importance that Beijing attaches to the technology amid its rising rivalry with the U.S.
We should strengthen risk awareness and ensure that AI is secure and controllable. AI should be a trusted tool for humanity.
For more, let's bring in our China correspondent Min Lo in Shanghai. And Min, Xi Jinping's presence itself says everything. Talk to us about the highlights from his speech.
That's right. This is the 9th edition of the World AI Conference. I remember when it started off 9 years ago. In the early years, not many journalists would even bother attending the event. But now it's a completely different story, a very high-profile event. President Xi in town here in Shanghai. You really feel like you're in the middle of something important. He spent 10 to 15 minutes or so speaking at the opening ceremony here and really focusing on the need for AI governance. He talked about some key questions we need to start considering now as AI continues to develop. How do humans coexist with machines? How do we safeguard security when algorithms are making the decisions? And he says that the AI governance framework must be a multilateral one. And he also talked about the need to bridge the digital divide between the haves and have-nots, and particularly helping the global south to expand their AI capabilities. So he made some key announcements, including offering at least 5,000 training opportunities for people from the global south, from countries like the BRICS nations, from the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, from the Caribbean and Latin America. So some of the friends of China in some ways are going to benefit from this. Also announcing that they will make available an AI-powered meteorological warning system to help safeguard homes. So distributing the fruits, if you will, of AI investments from China to the rest of the world. And Chinese state media as well has been touting China's homegrown open source model approach and how that contrasts greatly with the proprietary closed source model approach that is favored by the US. And again, showing this as yet another example of China taking the lead in setting a new standard for global AI.
Min, tell us about some of the new tech being showcased at that AI conference.
Yes, I'll be attending it later. It wasn't open this morning because of President Xi's speech, but I did take a tour yesterday when it was not yet open to the public, and there's a lot on tap, right? Because there's 100,000 square meters in space, a huge exhibition hall with more than 1,000 companies. Many of them are unveiling new products. I'm told there are at least 300 global product debuts, including, for example, Minimax, the multimodal language model. They are going to unveil a new generation of it. Huawei, of course, China's chip champion, is going to unveil a new computing cluster containing at least 8,000 chips. And of course, FT reporting that Kimi is also coming up with a new generation of AI model that could potentially be close to matching what US AI models like Anthropic's model can do. So certainly that gap between US and China is starting to close very much. And also, of course, you can't forget robotics. There's an entire section of the exhibition floor dedicated to that as well. So a lot to look out for. Sometimes you might bump into a stray robot or two just hanging out and doing their dance moves. So a lot of startups touting how dexterous and how intelligent their robots are.
You will have fun, Min. Our China correspondent Min Lo in Shanghai. Thank you so much for that. Well, another story we're watching. President Trump has accused China of interfering with U.S. elections in 2020, threatening to upend ties with Beijing as he focuses on securing a victory in the midterms in November.
Over a period of years, starting during the 2020 election cycle, the People's Republic of China carried out what is believed to be the largest compromise of election data in history, resulting in China's illicit acquisition of 220 million U.S. voter files. That information includes names, addresses, phone numbers, political party preferences, and other sensitive data that would be needed to register to vote.
For more, we're joined by Bloomberg East Asia government editor John Hoskovitz. John, what were some of the main points that Trump's speech addressed and focusing on election security?
Sure. I mean, he used most of this 25-minute address to revive unsubstantiated claims about the 2020 election being stolen from him. He used this to bring attention to the midterms and trying to get push for his legislation to make voter registration and voting more difficult for the midterm elections, saying that this is something that needs to be done for security. For things like the China interference, we reported that the claims that have been made have been debunked by U.S. intelligence, but the fact that he brought these up means that we're going to probably see more friction between Washington and China on this issue, something that will probably fit into the trade disputes going forward and comes as the U.S. is tightening visas for journalists from China. So, there's a lot going into this, from the midterms to relations with China. But the main part of this was looking at the claims that he's made before, many of which have been debunked or based on incomplete information or information that's already been known.
So, John, how might this land on the voters?
Yeah, I think that when it comes to these allegations, Trump's been making these for years, and I think people have pretty much made up their minds about where they stand on this. I don't think that we're going to see a lot of people change their views on Trump's claims about the security of elections. We had Democrats coming out saying that calling these, I think Schumer called these claims by Trump pathetic. We had another senator, White House, calling these claims election lies. It's played out in the U.S. for years now. So and whether the Trump so-called SAVE Act actually becomes law, it seems difficult at this point. It doesn't appear that there are votes in the Senate to make this law. So, yeah, we have that as the backdrop as we head into the midterms.
John, thank you. Bloomberg East Asia government editor John Hoskovitz there. Let's get more from Samir Puri, visiting war studies lecturer at King's College, London, and the author of Westlessness. And we're seeing that deepening, I'm sure, from what Trump has done. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are. Trump framing China as a threat economically, politically to the US? This is what, election scapegoat when there's something else to be paying attention to?
Yeah, my first thought is, well, this is a strange thing to bring up from the past. It is dredging up an issue that has been discussed ad nauseum in the US. And I think my reaction is this is theatrical misdirection, which is, well, let's look at China. Let's feel some fear again about China and its growing influence in the world and its impact on the US, when there's an unresolved war in the Middle East, which was co-instigated by Trump, and that is actually going back into a state of all-out war, as we know from what's happened over the last few days. So it's very strange to talk about China when there's the Middle East also going on, but I think we can all work out there's benefit for Donald Trump in trying to stoke concern in something that's totally unrelated to the Gulf.
It's like a chip on the shoulder, though, right, Samir? I mean, he can't let it go. 2020 loss to Biden, and seems it keeps haunting him. Is there something to read into that?
It's very hard to read. I mean, we're all sort of amateur sort of Trumpologists, aren't we? In which we sort of listen to his words and try to work out the sense behind them. But like you say, there's also always a verbal tick where he keeps talking about Joe Biden wrecked this, Joe Biden sleepy Joe. And Joe Biden is not a proximate issue on the issues of right now, but he references it repeatedly. So there's probably something around his MAGA base which might find this a fairly unifying message. That's not the whole voter base, but the MAGA base. Remember, the MAGA base was split over the way in which this war against Iran was instigated, and of course how it's unfolded since then. There's quite a lot of schism and fracture. And I think obviously the key point here I don't think is really China. I think it's elections. Like you said, it's the November elections in mind. And I think there's a very real problem that Donald Trump has, which is that the war against Iran may not be wrapped up or stabilised by November. The indicators are that it won't be. So then how does he manage the narrative? Well, amazingly, he seems to be doing it at the cost of stability of US relations with China, which had restabilised to some extent after Trump visited Beijing in May.
Even if he gets some of that MAGA base we talked about from this speech, is it enough for him to do well at the midterms?
The pace of events, Haslinda, is so bewildering, isn't it? I mean, even just unrelated, Lindsey Graham died a few days ago. I mean, certain things that would be headline news in another context are swept away by the next big story. So we can just imagine how many big developments, big stories instigated by Trump or just happening anyway between now and November. So I think it is more like a rodeo, which is can you hang on, can you hold on until that November moment? And this is the sort of manoeuvring right now. Of course, Trump will be hoping there's stabilisation in relations with Iran, not maybe a victory. And don't forget, Xi Jinping is meant to be coming to Washington in, I think, September. Late September is the date that's allegedly sort of put on paper the reciprocal for Trump's visit to Beijing.
Well, the risk is that his comments today may derail that relationship and maybe even risk that visit.
Yes, it would be an extreme move for the Chinese to then sort of put the visit on ransom for this one speech, because this one speech does not seem to have a lot of specific actions or retaliation against China. I think the Chinese will be very intelligently viewing this as a domestic political manoeuvre by Donald Trump. His focus, his audience is primarily domestic. I think the rest of the world is sort of slightly scratching their heads about this. Probably many in America are as well. But I think China wants, of all things, stable relations with the US.
Westlessness. I mean, the speech today deepens the Westlessness.
A whole bunch of things, which is very simply, it doesn't mean that the West or the US is vanishing. It's just that there's a lot more to play for, and there's a less singular role that the US and the West plays in global affairs. I mean, we're seeing that the Xi Jinping speech, which we were discussing and you were covering just earlier, about AI governance, that's a big, big moment. The Chinese government put out a white paper on their global governance initiative just a few weeks ago. Again, with so much happening, this doesn't necessarily get sort of chewed on. AI governance was one feature in China's new refurbished offering to global South countries, to partners in the developed world that may want to look on China more favourably. The sum total of all of that is indeed a Westless world, which is there are other options, there are competitor offers, and the US is not the sole heavyweight champion of the world as it has been for most of the post-Cold War period.
I'm wondering how you're reading Xi Jinping's presence at this AI conference. Is he sending the signal that AI has become the key lever for China?
Yes, one of the key levers. And it's interesting, I think, certainly with DeepSeek and some of China's great advances in technology, closing that gap with the US, I think there's an enormous amount for China to play for. There's a captive audience in global South countries, many of which are economic partners through the Belt and Road Initiative, which began in 2013. So maybe there's quite well-developed relationships with China. This is a rebooted offering, which is on the AI front, and I think it'd be very exciting, because if China can compete on cost grounds, with the US, with Japan, with others, that's really an open road, I think, for China to make some serious inroads in developing telecommunications, developing AI governance, as well as provision of technology. So I think quite a lot to play for in the next few years.
So decoupling is inevitable, right? I mean, obviously, Xi Jinping is going all out to woo the global south. We saw Kazakhstan, Cambodia, Thailand, all present at this AI conference. He is trying to exert Chinese influence in AI.
Unquestionably. And it's interesting what this will then come down to is I don't think sometimes people portray this as a Cold War where you're in one camp or the other. I'm more interested in the mix and match options for some of these countries in the global south and elsewhere, where they actually have a mixture of tech, and maybe it can't speak to each other. But at the moment, I think they're being wooed by all sides, and I don't think it's as simple as to say they'll fall into a Chinese camp or a US camp. I suspect it might be on specific technology, specific initiatives, and
I suspect it's going to be on cost.
On cost as well, and it might leave countries with an interesting hodgepodge of technology dependencies and relationships stretching to the Europeans, to the Americans, to the Chinese. So I don't think it's necessary to capture the full market. Chinese will certainly have a go, Americans will have a go, but definitely on this point of cost. Unless, and we know there's another story about overvaluation of US tech companies and AI, not to go down that point, but it is an important point because if China could compete on cost grounds, when there's a parallel discussion about valuation on sort of the future financials of US AI giants, that could be a story that plays out over the next few years, I think.
AI, does it increase or decrease insecurity? I mean, as the two sides, China and the US, try to play the leading role and the dominating role, how might this play out?
I have given some thought to this. When I was writing the Westlessness book, it's interesting that obviously everyone has technology, social media is everywhere, but I think for the liberal democracies with free speech, it's been very hard to manage the impacts on civilized politics. We see that not only in America and European countries as well. It's not as simple to say in a single one-party state. It's easier to manage, but I think the dynamics are different. And then, of course, there's the international point as well, which is AI is going to change the way in which weapon systems, economic coercion, all these sorts of things are also developed. So I think AI is what we make of it, but I certainly think we're already seeing very different signs as to how AI impacts civic society and the practice of politics in a liberal democracy like the US compared to other places.
And what are you most concerned about when you take a look at how it's developing right now?
Of all the things, I think probably the impact on weapon systems, because there's the other side to US-China competition is obviously a contest around the military balance in the Asia-Pacific in this region, and the temptation to think that you're on the path to developing a wonder weapon of some nature. That is probably the most worrying thing, and probably to compound the worry to an even extra level is the impacts on nuclear weapons command and control. These are all, again, things that will play out over the next few years, but it has revolutionized the way in which all kinds of technologies are being thought of.
Samir, great insights. As always, Samir Puri, visiting lecturer of war studies at King's College London. Thank you so much for that. Still come on Inside, an update on markets as the sell-off in chip makers deepens, with investors suffering a fresh bout of AI anxiety. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. You're watching Insight. A sell-off in U.S. chip makers has extended into Asia as investors reassess whether massive AI spending will deliver the returns needed to justify soaring valuations. Let's bring in Garfield Reynolds, who leads our Markets Live Asia coverage. Garf, I mean, this has been going on to 5 to 6 weeks. Are we any closer to the bottom?
I think probably not. it's interesting. We've had a couple of episodes where shares dropped rapidly and then they bounced. But each of those were motivated by some specific factors, such as way back when DeepSeek first became an issue. Then there was the initial shock at some of the major CapEx plans coming out of the hyperscalers. And of course, the initial come down when the Gulf War got going and everybody got extremely agitated about the potential for $150 crude, things like that. But now we've got a combination of factors that are really threatening to flip the script on the whole relentless AI boom will lift all boats way up into the air narrative that had been part of what was going on for much of this year.
Is it fair to say that the AI darlings are now the laggards? I mean, we take a look at the Nikkei 225, down about 4.5% today. Coxia is down 25% over 2 days.
Yeah, and I mean, the pain just keeps getting spread around. Today, maybe you would see smaller declines in some of the other big Asian indexes if the Kospi wasn't taking a break. Then again, maybe the Kospi being part of it would drive everything down further. Part of what's going on, of course, is that these darlings delivered such huge gains that there's still plenty of profit for investors to take off the table as it becomes apparent that it might well be a very good time to do exactly that. So you've got that sort of thing going on. Meanwhile, they also still seem so elevated on a historical basis that we're some way away from capitulation. So when you have that revival in what's going on in the Middle East, hawkishness coming from the Fed and from other global central banks, and concerns growing about the costs and whether they're going to be worth it. You look at, we had both TSMC and ASML report excellent earnings on the face of it this week. That didn't help because it didn't assuage those cost concerns.
Yeah, you got to wonder, Gav, when strong earnings will start to matter again.
Well, we've got some major ones coming up next week, and Alphabet, for example, which if it can assuage some of the concerns that came out this week about what's going on with Gemini and its development, if we can get similar out of later on places like Meta and elsewhere, if you think Meta had a come down a while back when there were concerns that it was spending too much on compute, and it turned that around by saying, well, it has the capacity to be nimble and maximize what it can get out of it by potentially renting out some of its compute. So if you see some more positive strategies and rhetoric coming out of the earnings that are coming up, that could turn things around. But just more of the old big earnings by themselves, that's not enough.
Gav, thank you so much for that. Garfield Reynolds, who leads our MLive Asia coverage. Still ahead, India's monsoon season is off to a dry start, raising fresh questions about inflation, food supplies, and the broader economy. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. You're watching Insight. The cyclical weather phenomenon known as El Niño has returned. It is capable of driving flooding in one continent and drought in another. The U.S. Climate Prediction Center says the weather pattern will likely intensify as the year progresses. There's also a 67% chance it could evolve into a very strong event informally known as Super El Niño heading into next year. Its return comes at a tricky time for the global economy, which is already contending with an energy crunch, fertilizer shortages, and inflationary pressures due to the war in the Middle East. India is already feeling the effects of El Niño. The country's monsoon deficit has widened to 24%. That's according to the India Meteorological Department. Let's go across to Bloomberg's Manaka Doshi now on how she's reading the below normal rains in India. Huge repercussions for India, Manaka.
Hi, Has. Good morning. Yes, it is turning out to be a tough monsoon. It did look like we might play catch up in the first few weeks of July, but we've hit a pause in most parts of the country right now. You pointed out to the monsoon deficiency, which is roughly between 20 to 24%. Let me now list for you all the collateral impact. So in terms of sowing, the last I checked, we're behind by about 20% on sowing because of the delayed rains. Reservoir levels are fairly on track, though there is still concern about us not meeting the requirements by the end of this monsoon. Hydropower generation was down by about a fifth in the month of June because it was a dry month. And inflation, which is something the market's watching very, very closely at this point in time, has started to tick up. I would not attribute all of it to the monsoon. We've seen generalized inflation on account of crude price hikes in the months of April, May, or May, June, rather. But we are seeing a move up in food inflation. It is still well within the RBI's targeted territory, but close eye on that one. Now, the one last thing I want to say about the monsoon is that, it isn't just the intensity of the monsoon, but the geographical spread of the monsoon that's watched very, very closely in India. And the last I checked, more than half the districts in this country are experiencing a deficient rainfall. So, yes, we ought to be concerned, but this is an economy far more resilient to monsoon shocks because of the wider spread of irrigation. So it isn't really panic situation yet.
Manaka, do stick around to help us understand how the monsoon deficit will impact India's economy. We're joined by Siraj Hussain, India's former Agriculture Secretary. He's currently the Food Processing Advisor to the Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Siraj, good to have you with us. I mean, even the Ganga is facing drought-like conditions. How are you assessing what's happening in India right now, the monsoon deficit?
Actually, the deficit is quite large, and some 60% of districts have deficient rainfall so far. The first week of July gave us hope that perhaps monsoon may revive, but after the first 10 days of July, it has been very dry. It has been very dry after the first 10 days of July. So the worrying aspect is that the poorer states of India, like Bihar, Vidarbha in Maharashtra, the poorer regions have received very low rainfall. Bihar is about 45% deficient, and some parts of Maharashtra, which are drought prone, are about 40% deficient. So on the whole, the situation is not very good at this point of time.
India finds itself in this situation over and over again through the years. I'm just wondering how much is really meteorological, how much is policy-driven vulnerability?
Actually, the area under irrigation has increased by about 10% over the last 12, 13 years. So in 2015-16, when I was Secretary Agriculture, the area under irrigation was about 45% of gross cultivated area. Now it is touching 55%. Similarly, micro irrigation coverage has also improved. But overall, large parts of India continue to depend on rainfall. And it is not only the dry regions, even in the irrigated areas like northwest region of India, Punjab, Haryana, UP, there also we need monsoon rains so that the underground water is, the drawl from the underground water is lower. Otherwise, recharging becomes even more worrisome.
Siraj, people point to chronic underinvestment in watershed management. What do you say to that?
No, we can always demand more money, but what has happened over the years is that large irrigation projects have dragged on for years, especially in Maharashtra and some other regions of India. And vast sums of money have been invested by the government, but they did not yield the result which was expected. And therefore, in 2014, when the new Modi government was sworn in, it was decided that we will select 99 projects and complete them faster. And I think the progress there has been quite good. The government has paid a lot of attention, but I agree that in several parts of India, micro irrigation could substantially improve. And there is a need to invest more in micro irrigation and in other aspects. But having said this, we can always ask for more money, but there are competing demands for that.
Siraj, what are you looking at right now in terms of the data points over the next few weeks to feel a little less concerned, both in terms of the collateral impact of this rainfall, but most importantly within that, the impact on food production?
I think overall the production of food grains will not be very much lower, because in 2015-16, it was second consecutive year of drought, and still the food grain production was lower by only about 5%. So I do not see much worry on account of that. But I think the production of maize is going to be lower. The production of cotton may be lower. And especially pulses and oilseeds production may be lower, which may have to import more pulses, perhaps at lower duty. And therefore, there will be impact on food inflation. We cannot say that we are completely shielded from that.
Any sense of how large that impact will be, Siraj? And the reason I ask is because we went into this monsoon with a more than adequate food buffer stock from the data I've looked at. Now, that might largely be rice, wheat, but nonetheless, where do you see the price impact turning out to be the worst?
Actually, a lot depends on how the rainfall is distributed from now till the end of August. But I think we will see inflation in pulses, we will see inflation in oilseeds, as I said, and therefore food inflation may cross 6-7%, consumer food inflation. Wheat and rice, of course, we are very comfortable. But, you know, an odd thing here is that the government has allocated 7.2 million tons of rice for ethanol. So I think that needs a relook, especially in view of lower area coverage for maize in both Maharashtra and Karnataka, which are major kharif maize producing states.
Okay, I do also want to ask you, as former Agriculture Secretary, you would have witnessed the impact of what a deficient monsoon means for rural incomes. That's another metric we're trying to get a sense of. I understand the impact has changed over the last decade and rural incomes are more buoyant and less monsoon dependent. Yet, what's your take on that?
No, rural incomes will be affected, and as I mentioned, the poorer states of East India like Bihar, Jharkhand, etc., and the poorer regions of West India like Vidarbha, Telangana have received very low rainfall. So it is not only agriculture which suffers under these circumstances. The fodder availability becomes a problem, drinking water becomes a problem, because even the reservoir levels are very low. I was looking at the data and I find that in UP, it is just about 22% reservoir level. And in West Bengal, just about 19%. Telangana also very low levels. So rural economy will be affected, and rural incomes will definitely be affected, especially small farmers and agricultural laborers. So a lot will depend on whether G Ramji, the new scheme, which has been introduced in place of Mahatma Gandhi Narega, this employment generation scheme, how does it fare? Because in the new dispensation, the state governments have to contribute 40% of the total expenditure on rural employment. Earlier, on employment, their contribution was zero. So I do not know how keen will be the states in providing employment to rural people under the employment guarantee scheme.
Siraj, do you see crop support prices going up significantly? What's the sense you're getting?
No, I do not think that the Commission for Agriculture Cost and Prices will recommend higher prices. In any case, the prices for Kharif crops, that is the crop which is now being sown, have already been declared. What has happened in the past is that if there is lower production due to drought or any other reason, then the government, even the central government, has declared bonus from time to time in some years. So depending on how monsoon behaves and what is the extent of production loss, it is possible that the government may declare a bonus, but I do not see any increase in the minimum support price. Of course, if monsoon continues to be very deficient, then even the winter crop will be affected. So it is possible that the government may take that into consideration and provide a small hike for the Rabi crops, for winter crops. But, you know, these price hikes have remained in the range of 3 to 6%. So I do not see a very high level of increase in that. From 6%, it cannot go up to 10%. That is what I mean.
In any case, I'm also wondering if the crop insurance schemes are actually enough and effective if farmers get impacted.
Crop insurance schemes are quite effective if they are conducted in a manner which is desirable and which is provided for in the regulations. So, for example, once it is known that you are going to have El Niño, and if you force the insurance companies to provide insurance after that declaration, then obviously insurance companies would be very reluctant. You know, the basic point of insurance is the uncertainty. Therefore, there are cutoff dates in the regulations, but many a times those dates are not honored by the state governments, and there is a push from the state governments and even the central government to force the insurance companies to provide insurance even after the cutoff date. So now that it is known that we are going to be deficient in rains, there is no point in extending the date now. So on the whole, I think those who have taken insurance before the cutoff date will be well shielded, but those who have taken insurance after the cutoff date on the recommendation of the state government, I do not think insurance companies will be very keen to support them.
Siraj, I'm going to move away from the direct impact of the monsoon to ask you two policy questions. One is the ethanol debate that's going on in the country, and this is in terms of mixing ethanol with petrol to be able to reduce our import bill, but unfortunately it does increase our water bill. I'm curious how you look at the rising proportion of ethanol in fuel in this country and what that really means for water consumption and the broad impact on agriculture.
You see, I have written on this subject several pieces, including long articles. See, what has happened is that 20% blending was a good policy choice, which was recommended by Niti Aayog. Now, it would not be very correct to say that because of this policy, water consumption is going up, because the farmers would have grown sugarcane anyway. Whether ethanol blending was 10% or 20%, that would not affect area under sugarcane. What has happened is that the government has provided rice from the government stocks. 7.2 million tons this year. That is a wrong choice. Again, it does not mean that farmers are growing paddy or rice to supply ethanol. What has happened is that several state governments are providing bonus on paddy. They are incentivizing rice. So it is coming from there, due to which the government has built up huge stock of rice. But lastly, it is maize whose cultivation has been encouraged by the government. And in my view, instead of maize, the farmers should be encouraged to grow pulses and oilseeds, because in a country like India, whose population is going to increase to 1.67 billion by 2050, we should be taking care of our food security first. So in my view, to sum it up, we should not be going beyond 20% blending at this point of time.
Okay, one final quick short question, Siraj, and that is that, every time we run into a monsoon crisis, we're reminded of the unfinished farm reform agenda. Anything top of your list this year that you hope the government will get to?
I do not think that there is political space available with the government to go for serious reforms. This fertilizer crisis provided an opportunity to the government to gradually increase the urea prices, as was done by the UPA government for diesel prices. At one point of time, diesel was very high. So then the UPA government increased the price of diesel by 50 paisa per month. Every month, the price went up by 50 paisa. Some kind of modification in the urea policy I was expecting, but that did not happen. So elections are due in several large states in 2027. So I do not think that we will see any serious reforms in agriculture policy.
Siraj, I want to pick up on the fertilizer crisis that you just mentioned. Just how bad is it as a result of the Iran war?
No, it is not very bad. In fact, it was handled very well by our government. What has happened is that the government bought urea at the peak of the crisis, Hormuz closure, at a very high price, $50 per ton. While before the war, it was between $450 to $500 per ton. So the government shielded the farmers by importing urea at a very high price. Though in some states, there are kind of restrictions on how much urea a farmer can buy, but there has not been any large-scale disruption in supply of fertilizers. Of course, the government's budget for fertilizer subsidy is going to be higher as compared to the estimate provided when the budget was presented.
Do you see any risks if the Iran war were to persist? I mean, it's gone far longer than most people expected already.
Of course, there is, every possibility that if the movement of ships is impacted, then availability and import for Rabi crop, for the winter crop may be affected. But in the meantime, Indian government has done very well to explore options from other countries, import of urea and other fertilizers from other countries. So I do not think that we are going to have any serious crisis of fertilizers even in Rabi crop. In any case, we are now better prepared after this crisis to handle situations like this.
Siraj, thank you so much for your time today. Former Indian Agriculture Secretary Siraj Hussain, and of course our very own Menaka Doshi. Thank you so much for that. And it's India's just kicked off its trading day, 2 minutes from the open. Here's a look at how the numbers are shaping up. Stocks coming online just as the rest of the region reels from a deepening chip sell-off and higher oil prices. India seems to be pretty much intact. The Sensex in positive territory, up by 0.5%. Global funds, by the way, have bought stocks worth $1.8 billion this month alone, the most among major EMs in Asia. And we have HSBC raising its call on Indian equities to neutral, citing easing risks to earnings from oil prices as well as strong domestic consumption. In terms of the Indian rupee, 96.31 is the level we're looking at, pretty much flat versus the USD. We're also keeping an eye on Reliance. The retail to refining conglomerate is reporting earnings later today. Its first quarter profit expected to climb year on year, driven by stronger margins, even as the Middle East disruptions weigh on the company. Reliance up by about 1% as we speak. Now, still to come, studying in the U.S. could soon come with new hurdles for international students. We'll look at the Trump administration's latest visa restrictions and what they could mean for students from Asia. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back. You're watching Insight. The Trump administration is scrapping a decades-old policy that allowed international students and exchange visitors to remain in the U.S. for as long as their studies last. The new rule will set a 4-year limit, requiring many people to seek federal permission to stay. For more, Bloomberg Managing Editor Jill Deesis joins us now. Jill, how much do we know about this new rule? How clear are we?
Hey, morning, Haslinda. So at this point, this is actually a fairly significant change. As you just outlined, under the current rules for these F&J visas, I will point out there's about 1.5 million students that are in the United States on these types of visas. They're allowed to stay sort of as long as their studies last. It's very different from other forms of non-immigrant visas in the United States. And so as long as they're enrolled in sort of the minimum number of credits that they need at these universities, they can stay. Under this new rule, though, as you just mentioned, this imposes a 4-year limit. Before then, if they need to stay in the United States for longer to continue their studies, they actually have to go and seek more duration of time. They have to seek an extension, provide some biometric data, and basically, it's sort of handle this in a way where previously maybe their universities would have helped coordinate this. But again, this does impose a pretty significant barrier here. So very, very, very different change.
It's a different change. Who is it likely to hit the worst? I mean, we know that lots of Chinese and Indian students in the U.S.
Yes, exactly right. So I would expect this to, looking at China, South Korea, India, as you mentioned, those students that, are, from these nations where there are a lot of them in the United States. Look, Haslinda, there's already been a fair amount of tightening going on over visa restrictions for people coming into the United States to study and in other capacities. We actually saw last year a 1.4% drop in the overall number of foreign students enrolled in universities, including a 17% drop in the number of incoming students. So, you're looking at a pretty significant number there. And that's in addition to various other forms of, either visa scrutiny restrictions that are kind of going on here. There's been, some delays in terms of applications. And so all of that is kind of contributing to this environment where you are seeing a pretty significant number, a smaller number of students that are actually coming into the United States to study.
And in the end, Jill, you can only imagine that fewer and fewer international students would find the U.S. an attractive place to go to school.
Yeah, this is something that, we've been seeing for a few years now. Obviously, the United States under the Trump administration has taken a much stricter approach to immigration policy. So we are seeing that sort of manifest in various forms. Obviously, that sort of extends to a broader approach toward immigration enforcement that the Trump administration is looking at. But yes, student visas is obviously a significant part of that. So it does raise questions about, sort of the ability of a lot of these, major universities to attract foreign students who are paying quite high tuition fees when they visit.
And Jill, before we let you go, these international students have been subjected to some fraud investigations as well, right?
Yes, that's right. So there's a program, the OTP program. That's one that's, under, sort of investigation for fraud. And so, again, does raise the possibility that while you do have these new visa restrictions that are being instituted on those applications right now, does raise that question of whether or not there's going to be further tightening on the types of visas that students and programs that students can achieve in the future in the United States.
Jill, great insights. Thank you. Bloomberg Managing Editor Jill Deeses for us out of Hong Kong. And that is it for Insight. Horizons Middle East and Africa is up next. Keep it here with us. This is Bloomberg.